Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're taking a slow, damp descent into one of history's most celebrated tombs with a gift shop, the Tower of London. It's not a prison, not exactly, more of a polite oubliette, a place you enter with a name and leave as bones, if you leave at all. You won't be thrown to the rats. That would be too generous. No, you'll be kept just alive enough to suffer properly. Whether you're a noble awaiting execution, a servant laundering the blood out of someone else's death rags, or a starving traitor scribbling your last words on a cold stone wall, the tower has a way of making you forget you ever existed outside it. So before the ravens start circling and the heads start rolling, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if these stories are the kind of slow, historical collapse you enjoy dozing off to. Leave a comment with where you're listening from and how long you think you'd last before begging for the axe. Personally, I'd slip on the mossy stairs and take myself out early. Now get comfortable, keep your head down and pretend you don't hear the footsteps behind the walls. Let's begin. It begins with water. Not the clean kind, not the kind that sparkles in the sun while birds chirp overhead and soft hands reach to help you ashore. No, you arrive half-soaked in the murky, oily Thames, dragged upriver like cargo, slumped in a wooden barge that smells like fish, rot and resignation. The oarsmen don't look at you, neither do the guards. No one speaks unless absolutely necessary. Even your chains seem to rattle with a sort of embarrassed restraint, like they've done this too many times to bother sounding dramatic. You don't step into the Tower of London, you're pulled into it, under the shadow of Traitor's Gate, a black mouth yawning open at the Waterline. Its original name was the Watergate, but that was back when optimism still had a seat at the table. Traitor's Gate suits it better. It's not poetic, it's just honest. This is where people like you enter. It's also where the river washes out the blood, when it gets bad. Your shoes squelch as you're hauled onto the slick stone. You're cold in that deep internal way that doesn't go away when you dry off. The guards escort you with all the warmth of meat being delivered. You are now, in the eyes of the state, an object, a liability, a disappointing footnote waiting to be crossed out. The man with the list doesn't even ask your name. He reads it aloud without looking up, ticks it off, and gestures. One of the others grabs your elbow and steers you forward. No one speaks. They don't need to. Everything that matters was decided long before your body touched this place. The smell arrives before the rooms do. You might think you're prepared for it, but you aren't. It's not just filth or mildew or old stone. It's power gone septic. Centuries of sweat and blood and human failure packed into damp mortar. Somewhere beneath it all is a faint whiff of candle wax and wet wool, but those are only distractions. The tower is not clean. It has been scrubbed, yes, sometimes daily, especially when a noble was due to visit, but it is not clean. The rot has settled too deep. It's part of the structure now. You're led through corridors that look identical, stone walls, narrow slits for windows, thick wooden doors with iron studs, the occasional torch sputtering in a bracket. Its light too weak to chase the shadows from the corners. You pass under arches so low you have to duck. You pass by stairs that lead down, and more stairs that lead even further down. None of them are labelled. None of them offer a way out. You realise quickly, this place is not designed for escape, it's designed for forgetting. Outside, people might still speak your name. They might whisper about your arrest in parlours or around smoky tavern fires. But in here, it's already being erased. The moment you crossed beneath that arch, you stopped being whoever you were. Noble, merchant, monk, scholar, it doesn't matter. You're a prisoner now, and worse, you are an expected one. The tower has seen your type before, and it will see your type again. You are a repeat offence. When they finally stop marching you through the corridors, you're deposited in a small antechamber. You think maybe this is the part where someone will ask questions, but no one does. One of the guards unlocks a chest and pulls out a tunic, a prisoner's shift, simple and undyed, the kind of thing you wouldn't wear to feed pigs back home. They tell you to strip, not kindly, just functionally. You hesitate and a hand moves toward a club. You don't hesitate again. As you remove the last remnants of your former identity, your belt, your rings, your boots that you had resoled just last winter, something in you shifts. You feel it, like a door closing in your chest. You are not just entering the tower. You are becoming part of it. You fold your clothes without thinking. One of the guards snorts at that. It's the first sound of anything resembling humour, and it's not kind. The tunic itches. The stone beneath your bare feet is freezing. You're taken through another door, this one narrower, darker, and led to a room with a low ceiling and a single window that barely qualifies as such. It's just a slit in the wall, designed more for arrows than sunlight. Your cell. There's straw on the floor, already damp. A wooden bucket in the corner, no bed, no blanket. The door slams behind you, and the sound reverberates through your spine. You sit, there's nowhere else to go. You try to gather your thoughts, but they scatter. It's too cold, too quiet, except when it isn't. Somewhere down the corridor, someone coughs. Elsewhere, someone sobs, not loudly, just steadily, like a leak that's been dripping for hours. The silence in between is worse. It lets your brain start to fill in gaps. Who else has sat in this exact spot? How many of them left? How many didn't? There are names carved into the stone, some in Latin, some in shaky, desperate English. Dates, crosses, symbols. You reach out and touch one, someone's last attempt to not vanish. The stone feels damp. Everything does. You're already shivering, and the night hasn't even begun. They don't tell you how long you'll be here. No one does. There is no schedule, no sentence length. You'll stay until someone remembers what to do with you, or until someone powerful enough forgets you entirely, which is in a way more merciful. And so you sit, soaked and hungry, and suddenly no one at all, beneath centuries of silence and stone. Welcome to the tower. You're not supposed to leave, and honestly, most don't. There's no such thing as fresh air in the Bchamp Tower, one of many towers within the larger Tower of London complex. You'd think, being this close to the river and all, there might be a breeze, a draft at least, but no. The air doesn't move in here. It settles, it festers, it becomes something heavier than breath, thick with damp, sweat, and the quiet stink of slow human decay. The stone walls sweat, even in winter. Not in a poetic way, in a biological way. Condensation runs down the uneven surfaces like pus from a wound. You quickly learn not to touch them with your bare skin. The cell they've given you, though given is an awfully generous word, is about the size of a pantry. Not a noble's pantry, mind you, a poor one. A cramped, low-ceilinged box with one narrow window, slit that allows in just enough daylight to remind you what you're missing. The walls are too close together. You keep your back to one, and your knees almost touch the other. When you lie down, your feet bump the wall, unless you curl up like a child, which is how you'll spend most nights, fetal, freezing, and furious. You try to take stock. That's what the rational part of you says to do. Make a plan. Catalogue your surroundings. But there's nothing to catalogue. You have straw, damp, flattened, and not entirely free of movement. The bucket in the corner is meant for your waist, though it seems more like a cruel joke than a facility. There's a wooden board nailed into one wall, too high to sit on, too low to stand beneath. You assume it's a shelf? Or maybe it's just there to splinter you on the way down when you pass out from hunger. Your hands are restless. They need something to do. They ache for a distraction. You find a small stone chip on the floor, probably flaked from the wall, during some long-forgotten winter contraction. You turn it over in your palm, then press it against the stone. It takes effort, far more than you expected, but eventually, after half an hour of scraping and dragging and grinding your fingertips raw, you manage to carve the first crooked letter of your name. That's all you can do before your hand cramps. But it's something. A mark, proof you existed. You study the wall more closely now and realise you're not the first. The surface is littered with graffiti. Some names, some prayers, some elaborate family crests etched in careful, obsessive detail. Others are nothing more than slashes, dents, frenzied gouges made by people too angry or too far gone to be legible. You wonder what happened to each of them. You wonder how long they sat here, carving those letters, listening to the same sounds you hear now. The distant groan of metal hinges, the drip, drip, drip of something that never stops dripping, and, most disturbingly, the man 2 cells over who hasn't stopped screaming since morning. You try not to listen to him. You really do. You cover your ears, hum to yourself, press your face into the straw to muffle it, but it doesn't help. His voice cuts through everything. It isn't a scream of pain, at least not anymore. It's a different kind of agony. Hoarse, broken, rhythmic. Like he's not even aware he's doing it anymore. Like his mind dissolved, but the sound kept going. And somehow, that's worse than hearing someone actively tortured. You start to imagine what happened to him. Then you stop yourself, because the moment you give your imagination permission, it will not stop. The dripping is constant. You don't know where it's coming from. You've searched every inch of the ceiling and floor, but it doesn't matter. You'll never find it. It's probably in the wall itself, some ancient crack in the masonry where water seeps through with maddening, ceaseless rhythm. It gets inside your head. It punctuates your thoughts. You begin to imagine things dripping that shouldn't drip. The walls, the straw, your skin. You try not to scratch, you scratch anyway. Time passes in strange ways here. There are no clocks, no schedules. Meals come irregularly, if at all. Sometimes you get food twice in one day. Sometimes nothing for 3. When it does arrive, it's shoved through a small hatch near the floor. A chunk of bread gone hard at the edges, and a bowl of what might generously be called soup. You think you saw a cabbage leaf in it once. The guard who delivers it never looks at you. You try to ask him the date once, and he responds by slamming the hatch shut mid-sentence. You think about the sky a lot. You think about how absurd it is that people are walking around above you, talking about taxes and gowns and hunting falcons while you're down here watching mildew spread like a map of sickness across the wall. You miss colour. You miss smell. Even the foul ones like dung smoke or fish markets. They were real. This place smells like old breath and stone rot. You've started sniffing the food more than eating it. Not because you're picky, because it's the only variation you get. Sometimes you hear footsteps overhead. Boots. Several pairs. You imagine someone being marched to the scaffold. You imagine someone being marched back. You wonder which one would be better. The screaming man quiets eventually. Not all at once, gradually. He fades to murmurs, then moans, then silence. You don't know if that's good or bad. You don't ask. You scratch another letter into the wall. Half your name is there now. You feel absurdly proud of it, like a child showing off a crooked drawing. It's the only thing you've accomplished in days, maybe weeks, you can't tell. The straw has moulded, your fingertips are bleeding, but your name is still there. That's more than most get. Eventually, you stop marking time in days, you start marking it in silences, in drips, in the shape of mould growths, and the disappearance of your own fingernails. And the tower settles around you, stone by stone, breath by breath, until you no longer wonder when you'll leave. You only wonder whether anyone will notice if you don't. They say you're being fed. That's the official term anyway. You're on provisions, which sounds almost generous, like someone's measuring your needs, tracking your calories, ensuring your long-term survival. But what it really means is that twice a day, if the guard remembers, a wooden hatch clatters open and something unrecognisable is shoved through it. The word meal is ambitious. So is food. What you receive is more accurately described as a suggestion of nutrition, a cruel little metaphor for sustenance. The bread comes first, always the bread, dense, grey, and always stale. Sometimes it's hard enough to injure yourself on. Sometimes it's damp in the middle, like it changed its mind halfway through baking. And there are bugs. Not every time. They like to keep it interesting, but often enough that you stop being surprised. At first you pick them out. Now you just shake the bread and eat what doesn't crawl away. You tell yourself they're extra protein. You try not to wonder how many you've already swallowed without noticing. Then there's the water. Though calling it water is frankly offensive to water. It's a liquid technically, but what kind is up for debate? Some days it smells like metal. Other days like something that used to be alive. It's served in the same wooden bowl as the gruel if they're feeling organised. Otherwise, you drink from your cupped hands, trying not to think about the slime lining the inside of the bucket. If you get a fever, and you will, you'll assume it's from the water. It won't be. It'll be from something worse. Once in a while, rare enough to feel mythical, there's meat, a strip of it. Unseasoned, overcooked, undercooked, or both. It's usually gristly and brown, though occasionally there's a greenish tint if it's been sitting out too long. The first time you see it, you almost cry. Not out of gratitude, but because your body doesn't remember how to digest it. You spend the next day curled up in agony, swearing never to eat meat again, until it comes back. And you do, because the body forgets pain faster than it forgets hunger. There's no pattern to the meals, no schedule, no warning. Some days they forget you entirely. Other days you get fed twice, almost by accident. The second time always feels like a trap. You eat it anyway. You would eat anything. You would chew parchment if you thought it might soften in your mouth. You eye the straw on the floor and wonder how many times it's been recycled through other prisoners. You stare at the splinters in the wall and think about boiling them for broth. The hunger doesn't hit all at once. It starts as emptiness, then grows into a hollow ache, then settles into a kind of constant vibration just beneath your ribs. After a while, it becomes a companion, something always there, always tapping on your spine to remind you that you're still alive, unfortunately. You lose weight fast, too fast, your clothes sag, your bones become more visible than your hope. You no longer bother adjusting your tunic. Modesty is a luxury reserved for people with enough calories to be embarrassed. You try to ration at first, try to make a chunk of bread last through the day, try to sip the water slowly, hold it in your mouth like wine. That lasts for maybe 2 days. Then you're devouring everything the moment it hits the floor, licking crumbs from your palms like a feral dog. Pride doesn't survive in the tower, not when your stomach's been empty long enough to start digesting itself. You start fantasizing about food, not just meals but whole sensations. The crackle of roasted skin, the smell of garlic in hot oil, the texture of butter melting on your tongue. You wake up gnawing on your sleeve. Sometimes you dream you're eating. You dream of pies, of soups, of great roasted birds with honeyed skins. You chew air in your sleep. You wake up biting your own hand. The pain doesn't register until your teeth scrape bone. Then you lie there, waiting for the blood to stop, tasting yourself. You don't cry, you don't panic. You just press the wound against the wall to cool it and go back to sleep. If you can call that sleep, there's a part of you that wonders if this is the real punishment, not the chains, not the cell, not the interrogations or the fear of execution, just this slow, incremental undoing of your physical self. This starvation that doesn't kill you, not exactly, just sands you down until nothing's left. You don't even have the energy to be outraged. Hunger takes that from you too. You start to forget how outrage felt, what it meant. You hear the guard laugh once, just once. He's outside your cell talking to another. Something about a nobleman upstairs who asked for salt. The punchline is that he got it. A whole bowl of it, to eat on its own. You don't know whether to envy him or pity him. You lick your lips and taste the sour sting of your own skin. Salt sounds incredible. You stop thinking in meals. You start thinking in mouthfuls, scraps, leftovers. You hope for someone else's unfinished bowl. You hope a rat dies near your door, and they don't notice for a day. You are no longer above anything. You are no longer anything. And when the food finally comes, if it comes, you eat until it hurts. You eat until your body says no, and your brain says do it anyway. You eat like someone who has forgotten the line between survival and punishment. And in the Tower of London, that's exactly the point. You're being fed, that's what they'll say. On paper, you're fine. You're not being tortured, you're not being beaten, you're not being starved. You're just withering. Quietly, respectably, as expected, and hope was taken at the door, probably still floating somewhere in the river. You won't be needing it here. They come for you early, or maybe it's late. There are no clocks down here, only footsteps, and you've learned to dread them all equally. This time, it's 3 pairs. Heavy boots, purposeful. You know better than to pretend you're asleep. The door opens without ceremony, and the guards don't say your name. They don't have to. They nod, and that's enough. You rise slowly, bones creaking, legs trembling from too many days of too little food. They chain your wrists, not tight, just tight enough to remind you that you're not being escorted. You're being delivered. The corridor is colder than you remember, or maybe your body's just forgotten how to feel anything but cold. You're marched in silence, your bare feet slapping against the damp stones, echoing louder than they should. The guards don't speak, they don't explain. That's not their role. Their job is to move bodies from one miserable location to another. And right now, your body's headed for the White Tower. You've heard whispers about this place. The White Tower, the keep at the heart of the fortress, gleaming in sunlight and freezing inside. Once a royal residence, now just another part of the machinery that grinds people into confessions. It's supposed to be symbolic, clean, prestigious even. But that's just for the tourists and the traitors, with titles. The part they're taking you to isn't ceremonial, it's functional. The part where truth is optional and confession is mandatory. The room is colder still. There's a chair in the centre, wood, dark with age and darker still in patches you don't want to examine too closely. One of the legs looks newer than the others. Replacements are common. People break things in here, sometimes themselves. You're not told to sit, but you do. Because standing isn't an act of defiance, it's just inconvenient. You save your energy for more important resistance, assuming there's any left in you. There are tools on a table, not laid out neatly. This isn't theatre, but close enough that someone can reach them quickly if the conversation doesn't go well. Some of them you recognise, others look like they were repurposed from farming equipment. A few are oddly delicate, like surgical instruments for performing pain with precision. There's a branding iron, though it's not lit. That's the only mercy in sight. The man who enters next isn't wearing armour. He's wearing robes, official ones, with a seal stitched at the shoulder that tells you everything you need to know. He's not a soldier. He's not here to protect anyone. He's here to extract. And he already assumes you're guilty. He doesn't start with questions, he starts with statements. He tells you what you've done, what you're accused of, who you were seen with, what you were overheard saying. The story isn't coherent. It contradicts itself within the first few minutes. But that doesn't matter. Coherence isn't the goal. Pressure is. His tone is dry, practiced, like someone reading the weather report. You're a storm cloud on paper, nothing more. You protest. Of course you do. You explain, deny, clarify. Your voice comes out thinner than you'd like, but it's steady. You tell him your name. You tell him who you work for. You tell him what you were doing the day they claim you committed treason. You offer details, names, times, locations. You imagine, absurdly, that he's writing this down somewhere, that it will matter. It won't. He nods politely, as if you've just confirmed something. Then he gestures and one of the guards steps forward. A fist lands in your ribs. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to collapse the air out of your lungs. You double over. When you try to speak again, your voice is gone. They don't want your story. They want the right kind of story. The one that justifies your execution. The one that makes your death administratively tidy. You realise, in that moment, that it truly doesn't matter whether you're innocent. That was never part of the equation. Guilt is a formality. Confession is a convenience. The questions start again. They ask if you know a name. You don't. They ask if you've ever heard of a place you haven't. They ask if you believe in the wrong version of the same God. You pause. That's your mistake. The pause is enough. Another blow follows, this time to your thigh. A deep ache blooms there, hot and wet. You think the skin's split. You don't look. You give them your name again. They ask for more names. You give them your mother's. They nod, satisfied. Then they keep going. Your brother, your cousin, your neighbour who once said something treasonous while drunk. You don't even remember his name, but you invent one. It doesn't matter. It's not about truth. It's about volume, about making your betrayal large enough to justify their effort. You think it might be over when they pull the chair away. You're wrong. That was just the warm-up. The next step is harder to describe, less structured. They test your endurance. They test your silence. They measure how much pain it takes to break your answers into simpler shapes. Eventually, you say what they want, or close enough. You lose track of what's a lie and what's real. Your mouth moves without thought. You're agreeing to things that don't make sense. You confess to knowing people you've never met, plotting things you don't understand. At some point, you stop crying, not out of strength, out of depletion. Your face is swollen, your limbs are trembling. There's blood on your shift, and you're not sure where it came from. It doesn't hurt anymore. Not really. It's too much effort to hurt. When they finally drag you back to your cell, you can't walk. Your knees don't bend right. The straw floor welcomes you like a grave. You lie there for hours, maybe days. You try to remember what you said, what they made you say. You can't. You're not sure if you even used your real name. Later, they'll read your confession back to you. You'll sign it, or they'll do it for you. The record will show that you cooperated, that you admitted your crimes, that justice was done, and that will be the last thing about you anyone believes. The roar comes out of nowhere. It splits the silence like a blade, low and guttural, rising into something unnatural and furious. For a moment, you're sure it's a demon. It has to be. You're half-starved, feverish, and sleep-deprived. Hallucinations aren't new to you, but this feels different. This sound isn't in your head. It echoes. It has weight. It vibrates in the stone like something alive and angry is being held just beneath your feet. You press yourself against the back wall of your cell, listening hard. There's no second roar. Just the usual drip, the usual creak, the usual screaming 2 cells down. You tell yourself it was a dream, that you imagined it. But the next day, it happens again. And this time, it's closer. It's not until you're dragged to the yard, a rare and largely performative gesture of fresh air, that you see it. Or rather, that you hear the guards talking. One of them spits and mutters something about the lion being in a foul mood again. You freeze. You stare at him. He doesn't elaborate. To him, it's not remarkable. It's just another part of the tower's day-to-day absurdities. Later, a rat-faced prisoner in the cell beside yours tells you the full story, or at least the parts he knows. Yes, there's a lion. 2, in fact. Or maybe 1 died. No one's sure. There was definitely a polar bear once. A gift from Norway. It used to fish in the Thames on a chain. An elephant, too. French, apparently. The creature drank wine and wore armour during parades. That part might be made up. Or it might not. Truth is flexible in here, and the tower encourages it to bend in strange directions. They call it the Royal Menagerie, a private zoo for the monarchy, tucked right into the fortress. Started centuries ago, when powerful people began trading live animals as symbols of alliance, conquest, or sheer grotesque whimsy. One king receives a leopard as a token of friendship. Another sends back a pack of hyenas, just to make things even. No one seems to question where these creatures are supposed to go. The answer, predictably, is the tower. So while you, a malnourished sack of treason charges, are curled up on straw soaked in your own sweat, there's a literal lion pacing just a few floors above you, behind a cage that probably has more iron reinforcement than your own cell. The irony is too obvious to laugh at. You're the prisoner. The beast is the attraction. One gets scraps and shouts. The other gets meat, a handler, and an audience. You try not to resent the animals. After all, they didn't ask to be shipped across oceans in cramped crates, paraded before nobles, and shoved into medieval enclosures barely larger than your cell. But there's a strange comfort in knowing you're not the only living thing here that wasn't meant to be here. You, the elephant, the bear, all artifacts of a kingdom addicted to appearances. None of you get to go home. You learn their noises. The lion's growl is deep and slow, like thunder underwater. The monkeys chatter at dawn. Something that might be a wolf howls in the evening. Or maybe it's just a dog with a better view than you. Occasionally, the guards laugh about a goat escaping. It ran into the kitchens once, apparently. Caused a mess. No one thought to punish it. Goats, unlike prisoners, are not expected to show remorse. Sometimes, if you're quiet enough and lucky enough, you catch a glimpse. A flash of fur through an open gate, the sweep of a massive tail. Once a guard passed by with feathers stuck to his boot, muttering curses about that damned eagle. These moments feel more unreal than anything else. You're in the most notorious prison in England, and you're sharing space with a diplomatic rhinoceros. The guards don't seem to find any of this strange. To them, it's just part of the job. Feed the lion, kick the prisoner, sweep the courtyard. You ask one, foolishly, if the lion ever tried to escape. He squints at you, then grins with too many teeth. Only once, he says. Didn't go well. For the lion, you don't ask again. Rumours drift through the walls. Someone says a monkey bit a noble's ear off. Someone else claims the bear was taught to bow before the king. One prisoner insists that a panther escaped once and lived in the rafters for weeks, feeding on pigeons and fear. None of it is confirmed. All of it is plausible. That's the real curse of the tower, not knowing what's real and what's just twisted enough to be true. You start to compare yourself to the animals. Not metaphorically, practically. They get fed. You don't always. They get names. You've forgotten yours. They get noticed. You are actively ignored. If the lion dies, someone writes it down. If you die, they'll scrub your cell and reassign it by noon. The elephant, you learn, had a custom stall built for him. You relieve yourself in a bucket you share with mould. One day, while lying half awake on your straw, you hear laughter. Not cruel this time, genuine, almost joyful. A group of children has come to visit, rich ones by the sound of it. Their voices bounce off the stone walls like birdsong warped through a funnel. They're here to see the animals, to marvel at the monkey, to point and gasp at the big cats. One of them, a boy, asks what's behind that little door with the rust. The guard says it's for the prisoners. There's a pause. Then the boy laughs again, loud and delighted, as if the idea of humans in cages is just another part of the menagerie. You turn your face to the wall. After that, the animals start to haunt you in your dreams. You dream you're in their cage and they're in yours. You're fed grapes while the lion wastes away in your cell. You dream of feathers and fur and chains, of watching eyes and twitching tails. You wake up growling. You wake up hungry. You wake up wishing you had claws. And somewhere far above your reach the menagerie continues. The tower's other prisoners, better fed, better housed, better remembered. You don't know if they're lucky. You just know they're not you. Night in the tower is different. Not darker, it's always dark, but heavier, stiller, like the air itself is waiting for something. There are no windows in your cell, just that narrow slit of sky that turns black far too early and stays black far too long. Without sunlight, time becomes a vague suggestion. You have no idea what hour it is. Midnight? 2 in the morning? Or perhaps it's just the long, black middle of nothing, a time the world outside doesn't count. You try to sleep. You try every night. You close your eyes. You breathe slowly. You count the drips. You curl up into yourself and pray that unconsciousness will take pity on you. But sleep doesn't come. Not fully. Not here. Not in this place that was built to contain death and still hums with the memory of it. You drift at best, hover somewhere between waking and dreaming, trapped in a body that won't shut down, and a room that won't let go. The tower doesn't sleep either. It creaks, it settles, it breathes. You hear things at night that you pretend are nothing. A footstep, too slow to be a guard. A door closing 3 times in a row when you only heard it open once. The sound of breathing, not yours, on the other side of the wall. You strain to listen, hoping it's a rat or a draft or your own imagination, but deep down, you know better. There are things here that outlast the bodies that house them. You're not the first person to try and survive these walls. You're not even the 1000th. The tower is crowded with the past, packed with people history remembers only when convenient. Some of them were famous, some of them were not. All of them were trapped. All of them left pieces of themselves behind. You feel it in the walls, not metaphorically, but physically. The cold is too deep. The silence too intentional. This place doesn't just contain ghosts, it is one. Anne Boleyn is the name you hear the most, whispered even now, as if she's still listening. A queen-turned-traitor turned footnote. She was held here once, not far from your own cell if the rumours are true. She walked these halls, wept in the chapel, stood on the scaffold with grace so practised it made her executioner shake. They say she still walks at night, clutching her head like a flower bouquet. You try not to think about it when you hear soft footsteps on stone, and there's no torchlight to go with them. Then there are the princes, 2 boys, young and royal and inconvenient. Locked away in the bloody tower, never seen again. Their bones weren't found for centuries, and even then, no one's entirely sure if they're real, but their silence echoes more than screams would. You imagine their small voices, their growing fear, the way the stone must have swallowed their laughter, one piece at a time. Some nights, you think you hear them, soft voices too high-pitched to be guards, giggling in the corners of the corridor before vanishing into nothing. And Margaret Pole, an old woman, a countess, dragged to the scaffold in her 60s for the crime of being related to the wrong people. The executioner missed, more than once. She ran bleeding across the green while guards chased her, and when they finally caught her, they finished the job with the grace of a butcher hacking at frozen meat. They say you can still hear her breathing near the green, that she never really stopped running. There are others, nameless ones, servants, scribes, low-ranking soldiers who open the wrong door at the wrong time. Lovers turned spies, priests turned martyrs. Children, born in secret, who never left. You don't know their names, but you feel them. You feel them watching. You feel them listening. The hair on your arms stands up when you speak aloud. You stop talking to yourself after the 3rd night. The silence that followed was too attentive. The guards know. They never say it directly, but you see it in how they move. They avoid certain corridors after dark. They speak more quietly once the sun sets. One of them carries a rosary. Not visibly, not officially, but you saw it once slipping from his sleeve. Another whistles whenever he walks past the old execution chamber. It's always the same tune. You don't recognise it. You wonder if he's trying to keep something out, or trying to keep something company. You consider asking them, just once, just to see if anyone else hears the dragging sound in the hall. But you don't, because asking gives the thing permission to answer. Instead you start watching the walls. Not the carvings this time. Not the scratched names and dates of long-dead men trying to outlast their sentence. No, you look at the walls themselves, the cracks, the wet spots, the stains, and you realise that the tower doesn't forget, even when the world does. The world moves on. declares peace, changes monarchs, invents coffee and carriages and combustion. But the tower remembers, and you are now part of what it's remembering. Your body will fade, your name will be erased, your confession will be copied wrong and filed under someone else's guilt. But this cell, this room, this stretch of stone under your back, it will keep a version of you, just like it kept them. The ones who screamed, the ones who begged, the ones who didn't know why they were here until it was too late to matter. And on some night, long after you've gone quiet, someone else will lie here. Some new prisoner, new traitor, new inconvenience, and they will hear footsteps, or breathing, or laughter, and they will tell themselves it was just a trick of the wind, just the tower settling. But it won't be. It will be you, because no one dies alone in the tower. Not really. You always leave something behind, whether you meant to or not. They come and go like ghosts. Not the vengeful, blood-slicked kind the tower whispers about after dark, but the living sort, pale and quiet, drifting past your cell without speaking. Servants, tower staff, functionally free, but never far from the same misery you're in. You see them during the rare moments your door creaks open, when someone drops a bowl or fetches laundry, when there's an execution to prepare. Their faces say nothing. Their eyes say they've seen it all. You used to envy them. Used to imagine that if you could trade your rags for a cook's apron or a scrub brush, you might claw back some dignity. But now, watching them, you're not so sure. They move like furniture, like fixtures, bent under the weight of too many years and too many names they weren't allowed to remember. The laundress is the one you see most often. She's older, skin weathered like a shipwreck, hands red and cracked from lye. She never looks at you, just gathers the soiled linens from a basket someone else left outside your cell. Blood-stained cloth, sweat-stiff shifts, the occasional hood that still smells like the condemned. She doesn't flinch, she doesn't hurry. Her face is unreadable as she walks off, arms full of evidence no one talks about. Somewhere inside the tower, below the barracks or behind the stables, there's a steaming room where the laundry's done. You've never seen it, but you imagine it constantly. The floor slick with water and old soap, tubs stained pink, ropes heavy with damp linen swinging from ceiling beams. The women boil the worst of it, not to sanitize, just to soften the stains before scrubbing. When the weather's warm, the smell rises into the upper corridors. The guards wrinkle their noses. The women don't react. It's always smelled like that. Then there's the cook, or one of them, a short man with a limp and a permanent layer of grease on his apron. You think he used to be taller. You once caught a glimpse of him through a crack in your door as he delivered food to a noble held in a cleaner wing. Your own meals come cold and crusted over, but you saw him slice a roast for the lord upstairs, glistening, steaming, aromatic. The plate was polished, real silver. The prisoner didn't even look up. You think about that cook often, what it's like to prepare a final meal for someone who knows they'll die tomorrow. Do you go easy on the salt, add a little more butter than usual? Do you bother tasting it first, or do you shovel it onto the plate and get out before they start crying? Do you tell yourself it's just food and nothing else? Or do you go home with the smell of someone's last meal still clinging to your fingers? Sometimes a servant lingers, just a moment too long, setting down a bowl, sweeping a corner that doesn't really need it. You try to catch their eye. You try not to look desperate, but it's always the same. They avoid you, deliberately. They've been warned, or maybe they've learned. Either way, you remain unseen. Less than a chore. Just one more cell to walk past. You hear them through the walls. Not speaking exactly, just working. Feet scuffing the floors, doors opening, closing, buckets clanging, spoons scraping, a rhythm to it. One that keeps the tower running like a beast with 1,000 invisible hands. You envy them that rhythm, even as it grinds them down. At least they know what tomorrow looks like. Yours ends whenever someone decides it should. The guards don't treat them kindly, But they don't treat them like prisoners either. Orders barked, slaps doled out, names misremembered, but the servants get to leave the cellars. They walk the outer grounds. Some even sleep off-site, and yet none of them ever look free. Their eyes are flat, their mouths closed, like people who've been trained to witness horror without acknowledging it. A kind of practiced stillness that comes from cleaning up after death so often, the smell doesn't register anymore. You start noticing the patterns. The servant with the limp only shows up when someone important is scheduled to die. The laundress brings thicker cloth when a noble's involved. Maybe it soaks up more. The boy with the chipped tooth carries keys but never opens doors. He looks too young to know what he's doing. You wonder if he started young and just never left. You wonder if any of them ever do. Sometimes when sleep won't come, you imagine what it would be like to trade places. Not out of hope. You've stopped indulging in that. But out of a kind of grim curiosity. Could you survive as a servant here? Could you clean up blood without shaking? Could you ladle soup for someone begging for mercy? Could you ignore the screaming from the walls? You don't think so. But then again, you didn't think you'd survive this long as a prisoner either. You try to remember if you ever noticed servants before you came here. Before the tower. Back when you still had clothes with buttons and shoes with soles. You try to recall the face of the man who brought you wine at that last feast, the woman who swept the hearth. But it's a blur, just arms and hands and silence. You never looked, you never asked their names. Now you wonder how many of them had family locked away in places like this. How many of them whispered prayers for you to get exactly what you deserved. Now you're here, and so are they. The invisible machinery of the tower, one set of people caged, the other chained by custom and duty. Both of you trapped. Both of you forgotten. They pass your cell again, no words, no glances, just the quiet scrape of another pail dragged across the floor. And then they're gone. You hear them before you see them. Their voices carry down the corridor like perfume, soft, clipped, composed. No screaming, no begging, just polite tones and carefully chosen words. You think it's a priest at first or a clerk, but then the guards mention a name you recognise, a noble name, a name you once heard toasted at court, just before everything went sour, and suddenly it clicks. Someone important has joined the ranks of the damned. But unlike you, they'll suffer with embroidery. They keep them in a better wing, a cleaner one. Your cell drips, theirs gets fresh rushes and a functioning hearth. You sleep on damp straw. They have a feather mattress, or at least something that used to resemble one. It's all relative in the tower, but even the relative differences feel obscene. You glimpse the chamber once when you're dragged past for questioning. A real bed, books, a velvet curtain hung loosely for privacy, which in this place is the height of royal delusion. The prisoner inside is dressed better than the guards. Linen sleeves, silk stockings with only a few holes, hair still combed. You watch him trace his finger along the spine of a book as if it's something holy. He doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. You aren't in his world anymore. He hasn't accepted that he's in yours. You know his type. Everyone does. A court favourite. One of the golden ones who stood just a little too close to the fire. Maybe he flirted with the wrong noblewoman, or didn't bow fast enough, or said something clever in the wrong ear. Treason in court is rarely about intention. It's about timing, and fashion, and whether the Queen had indigestion that day. He gets visitors, not often, but more than you ever did. A priest, a cousin, a well-dressed man who whispers at the door and leaves without removing his gloves. You imagine the conversations, polite concern, feigned hope, thin reassurances that Her Majesty may yet be merciful. Everyone pretending this is a misunderstanding, a small bump in an otherwise golden life. They let him keep his books, at least for now. A quiet courtesy extended to the well-bred. He reads a lot or pretends to. You wonder if it helps, if poetry tastes better than food, if history distracts from the weight of an executioner's axe waiting just outside. You imagine the guards standing just out of view, waiting for orders that haven't come yet. No one wants to rush a noble's death. It has to be timed, framed, styled. Rumour has it they let him write letters, not to protest his innocence. Those were sent weeks ago and are surely sitting unopened beneath a pile of more useful paperwork. But letters of farewell, graceful exits on parchment, the noble way to scream. You hear that one of them was delivered with a pressed flower tucked inside, a violet. You haven't seen a flower in months. You can't decide if you're more disgusted or jealous. He gets food you'd recognise, roast fowl, real bread, wine even, watered down, yes, and possibly poisoned, though never confirmed, but still. Wine. They say nobles here die slower, but prettier, that the tower gives them grace where it gives you mildew, that their deaths are wrapped in ceremony, their suffering smothered in cushions and softened with Latin. It's not true, of course. Pain doesn't care how expensive your clothes were. But from where you're sitting, it's easy to believe the lie. The tower has always known how to humiliate people with elegance. The nobles don't get straw. They get fading tapestries and cracked chamber pots. Their chains are lighter, but they still clink. They're allowed to pace their chambers, compose themselves, rehearse their final words, but that just gives them more time to feel the silence creeping in. You can see it on their faces when they think no one's watching. The recognition that their title doesn't fit here, that the walls don't care how many lands they owned, that the axe comes just the same. Sometimes you hear the noble cry, not loudly, just a little too long during prayer, or a breath held too hard during silence. It's not performative, it's not controlled, it's not what he'd practiced for the audience. It's the sound of someone slowly understanding that he won't be leaving through the front gate, no matter how many pleases he pens in perfect calligraphy. You used to think dying in silk would be better than dying in rags, but now you're not sure. At least your downfall was messy, immediate, brutal. You were dragged in, interrogated, starved, forgotten. There was no pretense, no dignity to maintain, no family crest to shame. But him, he has to die gracefully. He has to smile when they tie the blindfold. He has to make it look easy. Like good breeding means painless endings. They'll probably give him a private execution. Tower green, fewer witnesses, no heckling crowd, just the right amount of silence, the right number of guards, and maybe a priest to murmur something forgettable. They'll bury him near others like him, or maybe not. Maybe they'll ship his body home, box it in cedar, and pretend he died of an unexpected illness. Fever? Maybe. That one always works, but he's still dead. Just like you'll be. Just like the poor man in the salt tower who stopped screaming 2 days ago. Just like the servant girl they dragged out of the laundry for stealing crusts. All of you end the same way. It's just the wrapping that changes. So you lie back on your straw, bones aching, stomach hollow, and you listen to the footsteps outside the noble's door. They're louder now, more frequent. You hear voices, clipped, official, measured. You hear the rustle of paper. Maybe the warrant's arrived. Maybe he'll go tomorrow. Or maybe they'll let him sit another week, rereading the same poem about death and pretending it was written for someone else. You try to feel something about it. Pity, envy, justice. But mostly you feel tired. They say he was someone once. You know better. He's someone now. Just another name on the wall. Just another silence waiting to happen. They bring him in loud. Not the prisoner. He's already been beaten half to death and can barely lift his head. But the guards, the clergyman, the man in the red tabard who announces the charges like he's reciting from scripture. They pass your cell in a tight cluster, dragging what's left of the rebel by the elbows. His feet leave streaks behind them. Blood maybe, or mud, or both. He's still breathing, though just barely. You can hear the wetness in it. He won't last long. That's not the plan though. He doesn't need to last long. Just long enough to scream. You don't know what he did. You never do. That's not how it works. Maybe he spoke out in the wrong tavern. Maybe he printed a pamphlet. Maybe he prayed to the wrong version of the same God everyone else pretends to worship. It doesn't matter. They've decided he's a rebel, which is worse than being a traitor. Traitors betray people. Rebels betray the story, the illusion that everything is fine and everyone agrees. Traitors are executed. Rebels are displayed. They take him to the lower yard for preparation. You've heard the process before. Stripping, binding, searching for hidden symbols, all done methodically, professionally. The tower doesn't rush this kind of thing. They measure the rope length. They oil the blade. They rehearse. This isn't justice. It's a show. The scaffold is already waiting. It's not the usual kind, not the clean, sharp execution you've heard the nobles get. No blindfolds, no quiet prayers. This is hanged, drawn, and quartered. The full performance, reserved for rebels, radicals, and anyone the crown wants people to remember screaming. The rebel gets no privacy. He'll die in public, on Tower Hill, where the crowd can see every inch of him fall apart. That's the point. That's the message. They want everyone, peasants, pilgrims, visiting dignitaries, to understand exactly what happens when you say the wrong thing too loudly, when you refuse to kneel at the right moment, when you try to change the ending of the story the tower's been telling for centuries. From your cell, you can't see the scaffold, but you hear it, the muffled swell of voices, the jeers, the shouted prayers, the drums, always the drums. They beat in time with the condemned man's final walk. And then silence, brief, heavy. Like the tower itself is inhaling. The hanging comes first, not to kill, just to weaken. The rope is short, the drop shallow. Enough to choke, not enough to snap. You've been told it's the worst part, the flailing, the gasping, the crowd loving every second of it. They call it mercy when the hangman pulls down on your legs to speed it along. You don't know if he gets paid extra for that. You doubt it. Then comes the rest. They cut him down, alive, barely, and then they start the real work, the disembowelment, the burning of his entrails while he's still breathing. You don't want to imagine it, but your mind does it anyway. You picture the smoke rising, the crowd recoiling and then stepping closer again. The executioner elbows deep in a man who was still walking 15 minutes ago. They quarter the body next. Horses, ropes, axes. You're not sure how literal the drawn part is anymore. You've heard different things. Either way, it ends with parts of him going in different directions. North, south, east, west, like a warning etched across the map of England. His head stays here though. That's tradition. And the tower does love tradition. By nightfall you smell it. The blood. The smoke. The burnt fat in the air that clings to your skin. You press your face into your sleeve, but it's already in the fabric, in your hair, in your lungs. You won't forget it. That's the point. No one does. The next morning you hear the creak of ladders, the clatter of nails. They're mounting the head. It goes on a spike above the gate, just high enough to be unmistakable, but not so high that you can't see the details. They say it keeps the crows away when they dip the head in pitch. You've seen it once, long ago before you were here, when you were still allowed to walk the city. You looked up. You didn't mean to. It caught your eye. It always does. The blank, swollen face. The hair already drifting in the wind, like it wants to leave without the rest. You think about that now. About how, even after death, the rebel has to work. Has to serve as a message, a moral, a warning. He doesn't get to rest. He doesn't even get to decay in peace. His body is a billboard. His suffering recycled. The servants scrub the scaffold afterward. You hear them talking quietly, trying not to gag. One of them vomits behind the kitchens. Another curses the executioner for drinking too much and missing his mark. You almost feel sorry for them. Almost. The guards laugh about it. Put on a good show, one says. Crowd loved it. Another jokes about which direction they'll send the legs. You learn to stop listening. But the part that stays with you the part you can't get out of your head, is the way it all feels so normal. Like the tower was designed for this. Not just as a place of execution, but a theatre, a stage, where every scream is rehearsed, where every death has an audience, where every part of the body has somewhere to be. You lie awake that night, thinking about the man who died in pieces, thinking about his final breath, drawn out by a noose and then drawn again by a knife. You wonder what he believed in, whether it was worth it, whether anything is, and then you stop wondering. Because you know what comes next. It's your big day. You know because the guards are suddenly polite. Not warm, never that, but brisk formal. They address you as sir or madam, depending on your state. They give you water. They help you dress. They act like this is a coronation, not a beheading. The tower runs on ceremony, and today, you're part of it. You try to stand. Your knees buckle. They give you time to adjust. You don't ask where the strength is supposed to come from. You just try to keep your stomach from revolting. You're given a clean shirt, white, symbolic. A garment for purity, they say. For peace. You assume it's more for stain visibility. There's no escaping the optics of blood on linen. It's important that you look composed. The crowd expects composure. They want a show, but not a messy one. You're not a rebel after all. You're someone who needs to die, respectfully. The walk to Tower Green feels longer than it should. It's not far, you've seen it through slits in stone, heard the scrape of boots across it before. But when it's your feet making the journey, the space stretches. You count the steps. You try not to look at the sky, but you do. It's blue, mockingly bright. Birds are singing. Somewhere, a woman laughs. Not at you, not for you. Just a noise you won't get to hear again. There's a platform waiting. Modest, wooden. The wood has been sanded smooth, though the stains remain beneath the grain. A priest mumbles something nearby, eyes scanning the crowd more than the condemned. You're handed a piece of paper. Your last words written in advance in case you choke or faint. You try to remember what you wrote. Something about loyalty, about honour, about forgiveness. None of it feels real now. You mount the steps, slowly, deliberately. You think of all the people who did this before you, queens, generals, heretics, favourites, and you wonder if they felt this hollow. You wonder if they stumbled. You wonder if they prayed it would go quickly and knew deep down that it wouldn't. The crowd waits, breath held. They're not large, just select witnesses, guards, and one or two scribes pretending not to flinch. But they expect something from you. Dignity, grace, a good performance. You try to deliver. You speak. Your voice cracks. You clear your throat and try again. You thank the crown. You say you die innocent. You forgive your enemies. You say what they want you to say, not because you believe it, but because it makes the end come faster. One of the scribes nods, already writing. Then comes the kneeling. You hesitate. The block looks smaller than it should, stained, worn down by the weight of too many heads. You place your hands in front of you, fold them like a child in prayer, and lower yourself. The wood is cold, your legs tremble, you can't stop shaking. You close your eyes. You wait for the touch on your shoulder, the signal, but it doesn't come. Instead, the crowd coughs. Someone shifts. The executioner is adjusting something, taking his time. You keep your head down, waiting, your neck exposed, your breath short. You wonder if this is part of it, the delay, the drawn-out silence. Maybe it's intentional. Maybe it's meant to give you time to reflect, or regret, or break. And then it comes. The sound, the whistle of the axe descending. And then pain. Not death. Not yet. Not clean. The blade lands wrong. Too far to the side. Not deep enough. It doesn't sever. It splits. A shock runs through your entire body. Not fire, not numbness. Just a bright, white stab of disbelief. You cry out. Your voice is raw, animal, involuntary. You don't even know what you've said. You hear someone gasp. Someone else looks away. The executioner mutters a curse. He resets. The second strike is better, not perfect, but better. It takes a third to finish the job. You don't feel the last one, but your body twitches. That much you're told. Later, your hands spasm, your feet drum the platform, your mouth opens, wide, stretched, as if trying to finish a thought your brain no longer owns. You flop forward. The crowd exhales. It's over. Polite clapping follows. Not much, just a few hands meeting softly, as if applauding a well-rehearsed scene. It's not celebration, it's ritual. This is what's done. You die, and they acknowledge it, and the world continues. The guards move quickly. The body is taken down. The head lifted for display. Someone wipes the axe. Someone else marks the name in a ledger. You are logged. You are cleaned up. You are removed. The tower runs on precision, and you are just a scheduled event. The blood is washed off the platform. The linen is bagged. The axe is returned to its place. The priest folds his hands. The crowd disperses. No speeches, no flowers. No one asks who you were, only how long it took. By sunset, another prisoner will take your cell. Someone will find a scrap of your hair in the corner and not think twice. The cook will ladle stew. The laundry woman will scrub the shift. The executioner will get drunk. And the axe will be ready for tomorrow. Eventually the blood dried. The execution slowed. The public stopped watching. The Tower of London began its long, reluctant transformation, not into mercy, but into procedure. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the blades grew dull, not from disuse but disinterest. The tower no longer needed to perform death loudly. It had learned how to kill quietly. The scaffolds were dismantled. The trapdoors replaced the axes. The public squares emptied, and the silence that followed was not peace. It was administrative. The tower adapted. It always does. The stone stayed, but the methods shifted. Now prisoners arrived through paperwork, not shackles. They were given cells with locks instead of guards. They signed documents. They wore uniforms. They waited not for executioners, but for clerks. Political prisoners were still welcomed, though now with less ceremony and more record-keeping. Rebels became pamphleteers. Traitors became publishers. Dissent no longer ended in torture chambers. It ended in reviews, appeals, and polite letters stamped with the royal crest. Some prisoners were granted books, gardens, even conversation. But none of that changed the fact that they were still inside. The tower had traded pain for delay, a cleaner kind of decay. By the early 1700s, even the language changed. Confinement replaced imprisonment. Inmates replaced traitors. No one spoke of dungeons. They were lower-level cells. Executions still happened. The tower would never give those up completely. But they were now scheduled with clerks and overseen by men in waistcoats. The axe had been replaced with the rope. The screams had been replaced with silence. The deaths still happened. They just took longer. Some of the condemned were poets, philosophers, foreign spies. Their crimes were harder to illustrate with fire and steel, but easier to summarize on forms. They spent months, sometimes years, awaiting fate in well-ventilated rooms with cots and candles. Occasionally, they were allowed to write. Occasionally, they were read. Occasionally, they were forgotten while still breathing. Visitors came more often now. The tower was opening its gates, bit by bit, to public curiosity. Nobles toured the battlements, schoolboys pointed at the ravens, and behind a locked door, a former revolutionary died of pneumonia with a prayer book in one hand and manacles still fastened loosely around the other. He had been there for 3 years. His name was misspelled on the ledger. Executions became rare enough to be novel. The last one on Tower Hill took place in 1747. Lord Lovat, a Jacobite, old, slow and unrepentant. They say the scaffold collapsed before the axe could fall. Some called it justice, others irony. The tower made no comment. It simply absorbed the moment, as it always had. By the time the 1800s arrived, the tower had grown tired of death's spectacle. It wanted order now. Clean lines, inspections, ledgers bound in leather, guards wore crisp uniforms and polished boots. They saluted, they filed reports. The chaos of Tudor punishment had been replaced with the calm of Victorian punishment. Softer edges, but the same result. There were still hangings, of course, behind closed doors. By invitation only, no more heads on spikes, no more burning entrails, just a trap door and a signature on the correct line. Some prisoners went without protest. Some cried. All were processed. The tower had become a machine that whispered its function rather than shouted it. And yet, for all the change, the paperwork, the polish, the pretense of civility, people still died here. Not always by rope, not always by decree. Some died of boredom, some of isolation, some of despair with nothing sharp enough to cut their way out. The tower no longer needed an axe, it had time on its side and walls that did not listen. By the late 19th century, even the prisoners had changed. The tower became home to soldiers under discipline, officers under investigation, foreign spies under close surveillance. Their cells were cleaner, their treatment more regulated, their sentences defined in weeks instead of years. Some left with promotion still possible, others left in silence, but the tower remained indifferent either way. It was no longer feared, just respected. A place for ceremony, for the crown's pageantry, for tourists soon enough. The ghosts were repainted, the chains polished for display, the stones given plaques and the ravens' names. The scaffold was gone, but the shadow remained. Even as visitors stood smiling near the White Tower, there were corners that still breathed differently, places that hadn't forgotten how cold a neck can feel. In 1845, a clerk collapsed in the archive room. Heart failure, they said. He had spent 20 years cataloguing the names of people who had been erased from history. When they searched his desk, they found a list he'd been keeping privately. Unfiled names, unmarked graves. One page simply read, "Still here." By the time the tower was declared an official tourist attraction, the executions had stopped. The blood had faded. The records had thickened. The tower had become something people posed in front of. But its stones had not changed. They still knew how to hold silence. They still remembered how to wait. And even now, in sunlight, among school groups and camera flashes, the tower remains what it always was. Not a museum, a container. Not for people anymore, but for their echoes. You can dress it in uniforms, in scripts, in velvet ropes and gift shops. But the tower is still the tower. And some things, once buried in its walls, never leave. They just die slower. Then came World War II, and with it came the last prisoner. Not a heretic or a queen this time. Not a poet with dangerous ideas or a noble who bowed too slowly. No, this one arrived in a grey wool uniform, with a limp from a gunshot, and a dossier thick with intercepted codes. Joseph Jacobs, a German spy caught with a radio, a forged passport, and a story no one believed. He was wounded when they found him, barely able to stand. But the tower still stood, and that was enough. By then, it had been decades since anyone had died here. The tower was half a monument, half a military depot. Tourists snapped photos near the ravens. Guards polished their boots. The execution chamber had been swept clean and repurposed for paperwork. But it hadn't forgotten its purpose. Not entirely. The tower could still kill, if you gave it the right name. They locked him in the Salt Tower, a round stone cell that hadn't housed a proper prisoner in years. The walls were carved with Latin prayers and initials left by men who died under the Tudors. Joseph didn't add his own. He was here on schedule. The old ghosts barely stirred. They'd made room for worse. His guards wore pressed uniforms and carried sidearms instead of halberds. They brought him cigarettes. They didn't speak to him unless necessary. He was a file number, a wartime inconvenience, a holdover from an era that had mostly been swept away. But the tower knows how to wait. and it waited for him. No scaffold was built, no crowds were summoned. He wasn't paraded through the gate or placed on a ceremonial block. His execution was private. Just him, a chair, a firing squad, and a wall that had seen far worse. He sat upright, even with his injured leg. He didn't say much. He died quickly. The bullets hit clean. There was no applause, just an entry in the log and a burial in an unmarked grave. August 15th, 1941. The last execution in the Tower of London. After that, it ended. Officially, quietly. The tower was finished with death, at least in the active sense. It had served its purpose. It had held traitors, killed queens, buried names, and broken bodies. Now it would be something else, something cleaner, something acceptable. The gates didn't close. They opened wider. Visitors came daily. Tour guides practiced their monologues. Children ate ice cream where nobles once wept. The execution grounds were roped off with plaques and polished gravel. The block became a photo opportunity. The axe a replica. But nothing had really changed. The tower had always been a container of power, of punishment, of fear. It still was. It just dressed differently now. The blood had dried, but the stones remembered. The names of the dead weren't shouted anymore. They were printed in pamphlets, sold in the gift shop. Joseph Jacobs got a footnote. A single line, the last man executed at the Tower of London. He wasn't mourned, not publicly. His crime wasn't noble. His cause was already losing. He didn't die for God or country or some tragic romance. He died for the Reich, for espionage, for being in the wrong place with the wrong paperwork. But the tower doesn't care who you die for, only that you die inside its walls. It was fitting us in its way, that after centuries of spectacle and smoke, the last death came in a whisper. A man in a chair, a volley of bullets, a body taken out the back. Not an audience, it just a formality. It was efficient, British, entirely forgettable, which is exactly how the tower prefers things now. Still, the ghost noticed, not because Joseph was special, but because he marked the end of something, the close of an era when the tower didn't just remember death, it caused it. The ghosts made room. They always do. The walls folded him in, alongside the rebels, the queens, the scribes, the servants. He joined the silence. After that, the tower became what it is today, a national treasure, a historical site, an educational experience. You can buy a commemorative guide. You can walk the very steps Anne Boleyn took to her death. You can stand where Lady Jane Grey was buried, then go eat lunch beside the moat. The tower has become civil, marketable, paved in good intentions. But under all of that, the tidy plaques, the colour-coded exhibits, the costumed yeomen, it's still here. The weight, the memory, the quiet, claustrophobic knowledge that people came here to end. That it trained executioners, that it sharpened blades, that it held screams in its mortar and fed crows with what was left. Jacobs was the last to die here, but not the last to be kept, because no one really leaves the tower. Not entirely. You don't have to be buried in the walls to stay. You just have to be forgotten here. And most are. That wraps up your time in the Tower of London. You made it, in a way. Not through escape, not through grace, not through any triumph of will or body or belief. You made it in the only way the tower allows, by ending. There's no headstone, no ceremony, no monument carved in your name. You won't find your likeness hanging in a royal gallery or your story printed in the souvenir guidebook. There's no plaque on the wall, no stone with dates, no marker in the chapel floor. You were never important enough for that. Not quite royal, not quite noble, not quite anyone by the time the tower was done with you. But the tower remembers, not in writing, in stone. It remembers the weight of you, the shape of your body curled in straw, the blood in the cracks of the floor, the way your breath caught in the dark when footsteps paused outside your door. It remembers the things you never said aloud, the names you whispered to yourself, just to keep from forgetting who you were. The prayers, the promises, the bargaining that failed. Your bones may have been removed, burned, tossed, or buried elsewhere. Your face may have been forgotten by every living person who ever spoke it. But the place where you suffered is still here. And suffering, in the tower, leaves its own kind of scar. You weren't a rebel, or a queen, or a spy. You were just someone caught in the wrong wind at the wrong time. And for that, you were swallowed. Over the centuries, many have tried to define what the tower is. A fortress, a palace, a prison, a museum. But it's none of those things, not really. It's a mouth. A place that opens wide when the state needs something digested. You were one of many. You were one of enough. And no matter how many coats of paint it wears, how many uniforms change, how many school groups march across its stones, chattering about ravens and royal jewels, the tower keeps you. Not out of cruelty, just out of habit. You're in the walls now, in the mortar, in the joints, in the places no one sees but always feels. You're the chill that seeps through the flagstones before the morning fog. You're the breath that stirs the dust when the last guard leaves the room. You're what visitors feel when they linger too long in a quiet corridor and suddenly forget why they walked in. You won't be mourned, not properly, not loudly. Your name won't be recited in any chapel. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone will stand near the edge of the green, or pass the gate in silence and feel the weight of you. Not a ghost, just a pressure. A memory that doesn't belong to them, and that is enough. That's all the tower ever gave its dead. Not peace, not purpose, but permanence. You were tortured, starved, erased. You were made to kneel and apologize before they took your head. You were kept in silence so long, your own voice began to sound like someone else's. You were broken politely, systematically, completely, and you were never forgiven. But you were absorbed. There's a kind of dignity in that. Not the sort they talk about in court or write into history, but something older, something simpler. You became part of something that endures, not out of glory, but out of inertia. The tower has no favourites. It keeps everything, even you. And now that your story's over, now that the footsteps have faded and the stones have cooled, you're free in the only way this place ever allows. You no longer have to run, or kneel, or beg. You no longer have to explain who you were, or why you came. You no longer have to remember the name of the man who opened the door, or the exact date they stopped bringing food. You can let it all go now. You're not buried, you're here, and you always will be. Thanks for joining me on this slow, suffocating descent through the tower's long appetite for human misery. If you're still awake, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about which part of this royal stone coffin would have broken you first. Sleep well, and if the air feels heavy tonight, don't worry. That's probably just the walls remembering you.